Every night for 11 long years, he whispered the same promise before sleep. He believed it was faith, devotion, discipline. He never missed a single night. But faith without truth can be a slow poison. He didn't know that for more than a decade, he was programming his mind to stay exactly where he was, stuck, tired, and small. He called it prayer. He called it hope. But the universe heard something else entirely. And one night, when his world began to collapse, Samuel Whitmore would finally learn that there's a right way to speak to your own mind, and a wrong one. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, and tell me, do you believe in the power of the mind before sleep? Type yes if you do. Samuel Whitmore lived in a quiet corner of Cleveland, Ohio, in a house that seemed to breathe with the cold wind. The wooden walls moaned in winter, and the windows trembled whenever a train passed behind the yard. He was 42, though he looked older, a man carved by routine. His hands were thick, the skin calloused from years in the factory, and his eyes carried that gray, distant light of someone who has spent too long staring at the same horizon. His wife, Clara, worked nights sewing shirts for wealthier women, her fingers stiff and red from the needle. Their son, Thomas, was 6, curious, and too young to understand why his parents whispered so much about bills and why the house always smelled faintly of glue and oil. The Great Depression had stripped more than money from families like theirs. It had stolen the sense that tomorrow could be different. Samuel used to believe in luck. He once dreamed of owning a small tool shop, something of his own. But over time, dreams shrank to practical prayers. Enough food, no debt, no illness. He had buried ambition in exchange for stability. Yet every night, a small fire inside him refused to go out completely. It began as a habit on a cold January evening. The year was 1924. Samuel had returned home late, his boots caked with snow, his body aching from double shifts. He sat by the bed, hands shaking, unable to sleep. The world outside his window was silent, frozen, uncaring. He closed his eyes and whispered 3 simple lines, unsure why he said them or to whom. Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. And someday, I won't have to struggle like this. He didn't plan it, didn't write it down. It came out like a sigh. But something about the act, the quiet certainty of speaking words before sleep, brought him peace. For the first time in months, he slept through the night. So he did it again, and soon, it became his ritual. He called it the promise. Each night, after Clara turned off the sewing lamp and the boy's breathing slowed, Samuel sat at the edge of the bed, folded his hands, and repeated those lines softly into the dark. He believed that consistency was proof of faith, that if God, or fate, was testing his patience, he would pass. The years moved forward. The wallpaper peeled. Thomas grew. The factory changed foreman 3 times. But Samuel's words never changed. Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. And someday, I won't have to struggle like this. 11 years of repetition. 11 years of hope balanced against exhaustion. To anyone else, it might have looked like insanity, but Samuel wore his ritual like armor. It gave structure to the chaos, meaning to the waiting. But words can lie, even to the one who speaks them. In truth, each phrase he whispered was built not on faith, but fear. He didn't know it, but he was telling his mind that life was hard, that money was absent, that struggle was normal. He was commanding the world to give him exactly what he already had. Faith, when tied to fear, becomes a cage. And Samuel's cage was invisible, made of sentences and sincerity. Clara sometimes woke in the night and watched him. The faint light from the street outlined his profile. Tired eyes, lips moving, hands clasped. She thought he was praying. She never asked to whom. But sometimes she wondered why his prayers never changed, why they always sounded like apologies. Outside, the city roared on. Cleveland was a hard place to live in the 30s. Men vanished into bars or gambling halls. Some gave up entirely. But not Samuel. He was the definition of persistence. He arrived at work early, took extra shifts, never complained. When others quit, he volunteered. He believed his dedication was a kind of offering, a sacrifice that destiny would someday reward. But inside, something was eroding. There were moments when he'd pause at his workbench and stare at his reflection in the metal surface of the machine. Why am I still here, he'd think. Why do I feel smaller every year? The questions frightened him. He would drown them out with work, then return home to repeat his nightly promise. It comforted him to think that his voice was building something unseen, that maybe, beyond the veil of this hard life, the universe was listening, preparing his reward. But the truth was crueler. The universe was listening too well. It was giving him exactly what he asked for, a life defined by waiting for change, never creating it. Each of his sentences was a seed, but the soil he planted in was fear. Tomorrow will be easier, meant today is unbearable. Money will come, meant I don't have any. Someday I won't struggle, meant struggle is my truth. The mind does not hear the poetry, it hears the picture. And Samuel's picture was one of scarcity. Still, he persisted. Because that's what good men do when they don't know what else to do. They persist. Years blurred together. The boy became a teenager. The house grew quieter. Clara's hands grew slower. Samuel's eyes dimmed, but his voice remained steady every night before bed. He believed loyalty was holiness, that the universe would someday kneel to constancy. Then, one night in late November, as the wind howled outside, Samuel paused before saying his ritual. His throat tightened. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time in 11 years, the words felt heavy, like wet stones. He whispered them anyway, but this time, the room felt colder. His voice echoed back at him, small and hollow. He sat in silence for a long time after that, staring at the lamp. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization stirred, one he refused to name. What if I've been doing it wrong? What if my own words are keeping me here? He pushed the thought away, blew out the lamp, and lay beside Clara. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind repeated the question over and over until dawn. And a few days later, the world would answer him. It began with the whistle of the factory. A single long note, then silence. Men stopped mid-motion. The machines wound down. The sound of Cleveland's beating heart simply ended. Samuel looked around, confused. No one spoke. Then the foreman walked out of the office, eyes low, hands trembling. He said what everyone feared most. The factory's closing. Samuel stood frozen. 11 years of prayers, 11 years of discipline, and now, nothing. Just silence, oil, and disbelief. He went home that day carrying the echo of that whistle in his chest. And that night, for the first time since 1924, Samuel Whitmore couldn't speak his promise. Because maybe, he thought, the universe had finally answered. And the answer was no. The day the factory went quiet did not feel real at first. For years, the machines had been louder than the men who worked them. The place had a heartbeat, a pulse of iron and steam. You could close your eyes and still feel it in your bones. That morning, the pulse stopped. One long whistle, then silence. No grinding belts. No bolts rattling in trays. No shouting over the noise. Just the sound of boots shifting on concrete and men breathing like they'd all been punched at once. Samuel stood where he always stood, at the same press he had run almost half his life. He kept waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was maintenance, a reset, anything. But then the foreman walked out of the back office with his hat in his hands, and Samuel knew. This was not a pause. This was an ending. Orders dropped. "We're done," the foreman said. "I'm sorry." And that was it. No plan. No payout. Just done. A few men shouted. One cursed. One just stared at his hands like they didn't belong to him. Samuel didn't move. His first thought wasn't even anger. It was fear. He was already counting bills in his head. Rent, gas, flour, coal for heat. How long could they last without income? 8 days. 10. He tried to think past that and couldn't. On the walk home, the air tasted metallic, like snow was coming. He kept telling himself to stay calm. He had always stayed calm. He had always done the responsible thing. Work hard. Show up. Believe. This is just a test, he told himself. This is where faith matters most. But something in him was shaking now, deeper than worry. For 11 years, he had spoken the same promise before sleep. Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. Someday I won't have to struggle like this. He had held those words like a shield. But now he felt naked. Stripped. Exposed to the wind. He tried to repeat the promise that night, but the words wouldn't come. They sat in his throat like ash. Clara noticed. She was sitting at the kitchen table when he came in, still in her sewing apron, still pretending she hadn't been waiting at the window like she always did when anything felt wrong. "How bad is it?" she asked. He didn't know how to answer, so he didn't. He just shook his head and said, "They closed. It's over." Clara pressed her lips together, but didn't cry. Clara almost never cried. She reached for his hand instead. "We'll get through," she whispered. He wanted to believe her. He even nodded like he did. But that night, after Thomas fell asleep and the house went dark, Samuel sat at the edge of the bed and felt something break. Not a loud break, not a snap. More like the slow, final tearing of fabric that's been thinning for years. He pressed his hands together out of habit, because his body didn't know what else to do. He opened his mouth. Nothing. For 11 years he had asked the world to send relief. For 11 years, he had waited for something gentle, something external, something aloud. But the world had replied with silence, and now that silence was louder than anything he had ever heard. For the first time, a terrifying idea crossed his mind. Maybe I have been wrong. Maybe I haven't been speaking to God at all. Maybe I've been programming myself to lose. That thought scared him more than unemployment. In the days that followed, Samuel walked the city looking for work. Shops were closing or already closed. Men twice his size and half his age stood in lines that wrapped around corners. "You got experience?" they'd ask. "Can you lift? Can you work nights? Can you take half pay?" He said yes to everything, but nothing stuck. He would come home with his boots dirty and his pockets empty. Every day felt like walking around inside a question with no answer. Thomas watched him more closely now. The boy was old enough to understand that something had shifted. He spoke softer around his father. He stepped out of rooms instead of running through them. Once, Samuel caught him folding grocery receipts and stacking them in a neat little pile, like he thought organization alone could make numbers kinder. Clara stayed steady. She always did. She cooked smaller meals without saying a word about it. She pulled fabric from old dresses and said she'd make something out of nothing. She hummed at night, little barely their songs so the house wouldn't feel so tense. But even Clara could not disguise the weight that had entered the home. It sat in the kitchen. It sat on the stairs. It sat in bed with them. One evening, about 2 weeks after the factory closed, Samuel sat on the back steps with his coat pulled tight, staring at the rail line that ran behind the house. Trains used to comfort him. They meant movement, delivery, commerce, life continuing somewhere else even when his own felt stuck. Now they felt like mockery. Other men and other goods were going somewhere. He wasn't. That was when Mr. Henderson stopped by. Henderson was an older neighbor, a retired machinist with a limp and a permanent smell of tobacco. He had lived through more winters than most men on the block. He had the kind of calm that made younger men listen to him, whether they wanted to or not. He lowered himself beside Samuel without asking permission and offered him a small metal flask. Samuel shook his head. He wasn't in the mood to drink. Henderson nodded. He didn't take it back. He just held it on his own knee. "Heard about the plant," Henderson said. Samuel didn't answer. Henderson didn't push. After a long silence, Henderson reached into his coat and pulled out a thin, worn book. The cover had been bent and unbent so many times the spine was soft. Samuel glanced at it without interest. He didn't care about pamphlets or speeches or whoever was angry at whoever this week. He was past talk. He needed money. "This helped me when I thought I was done," Henderson said. "Maybe it helps you." Samuel almost refused out of pride. But pride is expensive, and broke men can't afford it. So he took the book. The title meant nothing to him. He had never heard the author's name. He opened it anyway, mostly just to be polite. He flipped to a random page. One line grabbed him by the throat. "You will get exactly what you plant in your mind. No more, no less." He frowned. He read it again. Something in him tightened. The book spoke about something called autosuggestion. It said that the mind accepts repeated thoughts as orders and then works, with or without your awareness, to turn those orders into reality. It said most people spend their lives repeating fear and then wonder why fear keeps showing up. It said begging is not creation. It said the subconscious mind does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you expect. Samuel felt heat in his chest. He kept reading. The author described a ritual, not a prayer, not a wish, but a declaration. A nightly statement of identity, spoken with full emotion, followed by real action in the daylight. Not, "I hope," not "someday," not "please," but "I am. I do. I will because I have already begun." He stared at that page for a long time. Something old and ashamed inside him squirmed. He thought about his own ritual, the promise he had repeated for 11 years. "Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. Someday, I won't have to struggle like this." He had thought those words were hopeful, but now, seeing them from the outside, they sounded like chains. Tomorrow will be easier means today is misery. Money will come means I don't have any, and I don't control it. Someday I won't struggle means struggle is who I am. It hit him with the force of a confession. I have been feeding my mind weakness every night. I've been tucking myself into fear and calling it faith. Samuel shut the book and rubbed his face with both hands. Shame burned in him, hot and deep. He wasn't ashamed of being broke. He wasn't even ashamed of losing his job. He was ashamed of how small he had been thinking, of how passive, of how he had spent more than a decade asking life to show mercy instead of standing up and taking authorship. He looked at Henderson. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Friend passed it to me when I thought I was finished," Henderson said. Said it wasn't luck that changed him. Said it was language. Samuel swallowed. "Language," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of the word. Henderson nodded. "Men think they're tired because of work. Most of the time, they're tired because of the story they keep telling themselves about work." That sentence landed in Samuel like a nail. He realized, suddenly, painfully, that for 11 years he hadn't been training his mind to build a future. He had been training his mind to survive long enough to die quietly. That night, he didn't sleep right away. He sat at the table long after Clara and Thomas had gone to bed. He opened the book again. He read the same 2 pages over and over until he could almost recite them. The idea felt dangerous, almost disrespectful. He had been raised to be humble, to endure, to keep his head down. This new language felt like standing up in church and correcting the preacher. It felt like claiming the right to exist. At some point near midnight, he understood the part that scared him most. Autosuggestion wasn't magic. It wasn't say it, and it appears. It was contract. Speak it at night, honor it by day. The words were not permission to wait. They were obligation to move. That was the difference. That was what he had been doing wrong. For 11 years, he had spoken like a beggar waiting at the gate. Now, the book was telling him to speak like the owner of the gate. He realized there were 2 kinds of nightly rituals. The wrong way, the way he had done it. Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. Someday, I won't have to struggle. And the right way, the way the book demanded. Tomorrow, I will act with purpose. I will create value and be paid for it. I am already building the life that feeds my family. The shift felt small on paper. It felt like an earthquake in his chest. His old words had been a request for relief. His new words would have to be a declaration of identity. And identity is heavier than hope. Identity demands proof. That was the terrifying part. Because if he said those new words, if he dared to speak like a maker instead of a victim, then tomorrow he would have to behave like one. He couldn't drift anymore. He couldn't wait to be rescued. He would have to start creating in the daylight what he promised himself in the dark of night. He sat there, trembling slightly, staring at his own hands. They were scarred and cracked and older than he felt inside. He whispered to himself, "Can I even do this? At my age?" Starting now, the house was quiet. The clock in the kitchen ticked like a hammer. The train behind the yard rolled past, slow and heavy, shaking the thin glass in the back door. Samuel closed his eyes. For the first time in 11 years, he built new words. Not a plea, a command. Tomorrow I will not beg for work. I will go out and offer skill. I understand machines. I solve problems. I fix what other men walk away from. I will be paid for that. I will create so much value that feeding my family is not a question. He felt his heartbeat in his throat. The words felt wrong and right at the same time, like wearing someone else's coat that somehow fits better than your own. He kept going. I am not waiting for money to come to me. I am going to meet it. I am not a man drowning. I am a man building a boat. He exhaled. His whole body shook. Then, finally, and this part was quiet, almost a whisper, he said, "My son will never see me small again." When he finished, he didn't feel peaceful. He didn't float on warm spiritual light. He felt wired, awake, on edge, like a soldier the night before a battle. He realized, of course, that's the point. Real autosuggestion is not a lullaby. It's a war cry delivered to your own subconscious. It's you giving orders to the part of you that does not sleep. He understood then that tomorrow had to be different. Not because the world owed him anything, but because now he had said it out loud. And once a man tells his mind who he is, that mind will not let him move like anything less. Samuel blew out the lamp, lay in the dark, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in 11 years, he was done hoping. He was starting. The next morning, Samuel woke before sunrise. The air in the room felt different, thinner, sharper, like something invisible had shifted overnight. Clara was still asleep, her face half hidden in the pillow, her hair falling across her cheek. For a moment, he just watched her and thought of all the nights she had carried the silence he'd created. The shame, the waiting, the smallness of it all. He wasn't going to add another night to that count. He got dressed quietly, not in his usual work clothes, but in his Sunday shirt. He brushed the dust from his coat and polished his shoes with a rag until the leather caught a dull gleam. He didn't have a plan. He only had a sentence echoing in his mind. I am going to meet money. I am not waiting for it. The streets were still half asleep. Steam rose from the grates, and the smell of coffee drifted from a diner down the block. Samuel walked without hurry but with purpose, scanning every storefront, every garage, every alley where sound meant work. His hands still carried the muscle memory of machines. He knew the rhythm of belts, the cough of engines, the way metal sang when it was tuned just right. He found himself outside a repair shop he had passed 100 times before but never noticed. The sign was crooked, the paint faded. Through the window, a man was arguing with an apprentice over a broken lathe. Samuel didn't think, he simply stepped inside. Need a hand, he asked. The owner turned, skeptical. You a mechanic? Samuel nodded. I've kept presses running for 14 years. If it's metal, I can make it talk again. The owner hesitated, then stepped aside. If you can fix that thing, I'll pay you what it's worth. Samuel removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and crouched beside the machine. His hands remembered what to do before his mind caught up. Within an hour, the gears aligned, the hum returned, and the apprentice stared like he'd just seen a ghost. The owner whistled low. What do I owe you? Samuel wiped the grease from his hands. Whatever feels fair. I'm not here for charity. The man reached into his pocket and handed him a few bills. It wasn't much, but it was money earned without begging. Samuel nodded, thanked him, and walked out into the morning light. His chest felt strange, not full exactly, but open. That night, when he sat on the edge of the bed, the ritual returned, but it had a new face. His voice didn't tremble. It carried weight. Tomorrow, I will find another way to serve. I create value, and I am paid fairly for it. I am a builder, not a beggar. I am awake. He didn't repeat it 3 times. He said it once, clearly, and then closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he fell asleep without that familiar ache of worry under his ribs. Days turned into weeks. The small repair job led to another. Word spread quietly between shops and foremen. The man from the closed factory, the one who could fix anything, was still working. He patched machines, tuned engines, and sometimes just listened to men who had forgotten what hope sounded like. He never called it luck anymore. He called it momentum. Clara noticed the difference before anyone else. He smiled now, not because things were easy but because he was moving. The house still had cracks, but the air inside felt lighter. Thomas followed him everywhere, asking questions, holding tools, watching how his father touched broken things like they were meant to heal. Each night, Samuel spoke to his mind before sleep. The words evolved naturally, growing with him. I am not waiting for life to change. I am the one changing it. My work has purpose. My family is safe. I give more than I fear. He began writing the sentences down, filling an old ledger Henderson had given him. Some pages were smeared with grease, others with tears. He wasn't ashamed of either. They were proof. Months passed. The city thawed into spring. Samuel's hands were steady again, his eyes clear. He earned enough to pay rent ahead, something he hadn't done in over a decade. Clara started buying fabric again, not for mending, but for making. Thomas grew taller and louder. The house that once echoed with worry now hummed with small, ordinary life. But the real transformation wasn't in the money or the repairs. It was in the way Samuel saw himself. He stopped thinking in survival. He began thinking in creation. Every tool he held, every word he spoke to his son, every kindness he gave to a neighbor was part of a larger design. One evening, Henderson stopped by again. Samuel handed the old man a small envelope. Inside was a few bills and a note that said simply, "For the next man who needs a beginning." Henderson smiled, the kind of smile that says both, "I told you so," and "well done." Before leaving, he said, "You learned it, didn't you? The trick." Samuel nodded. "It's not a trick," he said. "It's obedience. You give your mind an order, and then you make it true." That night, He added one final sentence to his ritual. I am grateful that I was wrong before, because being wrong taught me how to speak right. The words settled in his chest like something sacred. He didn't need proof anymore. He was living it. And for the first time in his life, Samuel Whitmore fell asleep, not hoping for tomorrow, but building it, even in his dreams. Years passed. Time, as it always does, softened the edges of hardship. The little boy who used to watch his father repair broken machines had grown tall, strong, and restless, his hands quick and curious, just like Samuel's. The neighborhood had changed too. Stores reopened. The scent of bread replaced the smoke of old chimneys. Cleveland was no longer the same wounded city Samuel once walked through counting coins and doubts. It had healed, piece by piece, the way he had. Samuel never returned to the factory. He never needed to. What began as odd jobs and small repairs became a quiet business. By the time he turned 50, men came looking for him instead of the other way around. They said he had a way of seeing what others missed, of making stubborn machines listen again. He smiled when they said that. Machines weren't the only things he had learned to talk to. He still sat by his bed every night, though his ritual had changed. There were no longer 3 lines, no formulas for money or ease. His words had matured like he had. Each night, before sleep, he simply said, I am grateful for today's work. I served well. Tomorrow, I will serve better. That was enough. It carried all the lessons he had fought for: discipline, gratitude, forward motion. The sentences no longer came from fear. They came from fullness. Clara often teased him about it. After all these years, you still talk to yourself? He would laugh and say, No, I'm not talking to myself. I'm talking to the part of me that never stops listening. She would shake her head and kiss his forehead, pretending to find him ridiculous. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would whisper little sentences of her own while folding clothes or turning off the lamps. One autumn night, a storm rolled through the city. Rain drummed on the windows, and the house flickered with candlelight. Samuel sat with Thomas at the table, now 17, his hair too long and his mind already stretching beyond the walls of that home. The boy had been quiet lately, worried about the world, about what kind of future awaited him. He was at the age where every question feels larger than any answer. Dad, he said, how did you know things would get better? Back then, when everything was bad, how did you keep believing? Samuel smiled slowly. I didn't know, son. Not at first. I just kept talking to my life like it could hear me. Thomas frowned, not understanding. Talking to it. Samuel leaned forward. When you speak to yourself, you're planting seeds in your own mind. For a long time, I was planting weeds. Fear, waiting, hoping someone else would fix it. It took me 11 years to learn how to plant the right kind. You don't pray for easy days, Thomas. You decide who you are, and then you prove it. The boy thought for a moment. So you just said things, and they happened? Samuel chuckled. No, saying them was the start. Doing them was the proof. Words are like a hammer. They only build something when you swing them. He could see his son filing those words away the same way he once filed screws and washers at the factory, carefully, knowing they'd be needed later. The rain grew heavier, rattling the panes. For a moment, the two sat in silence, the sound of the storm filling the space between them. Then Thomas said softly, Will you teach me what you say before you sleep? Samuel nodded. He pushed his chair back and stood, gesturing for Thomas to follow him. They walked to the small bedroom where Clara had already turned in. The lamp on Samuel's nightstand cast a warm, golden pool of light across the bedspread. He sat on the edge, motioned for Thomas to do the same, and said, You don't have to copy my words, but I'll show you how I begin. He closed his eyes, breathed once, and spoke quietly, the same way he had every night for years. I am grateful for the strength that carried me through today. I am grateful for the chance to serve, to think, and to build. I know who I am, and I will act like it tomorrow. Thomas watched him carefully, like someone watching a secret being unlocked. That's it, the boy asked. That's it, Samuel said, smiling. But mean every word. That's the part people skip. You have to feel it, as if it's already true. He reached over and handed the old notebook, the same one Henderson had given him so long ago, to his son. The pages were worn, filled with grease, ink, and time. On the first page, still legible after all the years, were the original words, Tomorrow will be easier. Money will come. Someday, I won't have to struggle like this. Below them, written in darker ink, Samuel had crossed them out. Underneath, in steadier handwriting, he had written new ones. Tomorrow, I will act with purpose. I will create value and be paid for it. I am already building the life that feeds my family. Thomas read them twice, then looked up. You crossed them out? Samuel nodded. Those old words kept me small. I had to kill them before they killed me. He let that sink in. Then, softer, he added, remember this, son. The mind doesn't obey what you want. It obeys what you believe. So talk to it carefully. Thomas closed the notebook and held it like something holy. The storm outside softened. The house creaked, and for a long time neither spoke. Then the boy said, I'll start tonight. Samuel smiled. Good. Start before sleep. That's when the mind listens best. He stood, turned off the lamp, and for a moment, the two stood in the dark together. It was the same dark that had once swallowed Samuel whole, the same silence that had mocked his old prayers. But now it felt different, alive, filled with presence instead of absence. That night, while the city slept, a new voice joined the whispering darkness. A younger one, uncertain but sincere, repeating his own promises into the quiet. 2 generations of belief breathing in rhythm. The following spring, Samuel turned 55. Henderson passed away that year. Samuel attended the small funeral, and, as he stood by the grave, he realized something simple. Everything he had learned because someone once handed him a book and believed he might use it. He wondered how many men had lived and died, never realizing they could command their own thoughts. It made him feel both humble and responsible. On his way home, he stopped at a print shop and ordered 10 small notebooks, identical to his own. On the first page of each, he wrote a single line. The mind listens most when the world is quiet. He gave them away to anyone who seemed lost. A neighbor, a clerk, a boy at the market. He didn't preach. He didn't explain. He just said, write who you are becoming. By then, his hair was streaked with gray, but his hands were still strong. The shop he built had grown to 3 employees, one of them his son. Life was not perfect, it never is, but it was whole. There were still problems, but they no longer felt like punishment. They felt like proof of movement. Every night, Samuel still performed his small ritual. No candles, no theatrics. Just him, the dark, and the voice of a man who finally knew the language of his own mind. I am grateful for today. I am ready for tomorrow. I am alive, and that's enough. And maybe, somewhere, the universe nodded in agreement. Because faith, he had learned, isn't waiting for signs. It's giving the orders yourself, and then marching in their direction. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. And tell me in the comments, what words will you whisper before you sleep?